Make up mine. Fight.
Team Fortress 2 has a lot of unlockable weapons. I feel like that's something people tend to forget when they're clamoring for new ones and pretending that they're the only things that can make a potential new update worth anything. But yeah, TF2 has over 130 unlockable weapons with unique stats across its 9 classes. Because of this and the game's age, the general meta for each class is pretty comfortably set in stone. You don't often see people deviate from what's expected of them at serious levels of play, and when they do, it's usually just a meme around with an off-meta playstyle. That said, there genuinely are a few legitimately good TF2 weapons that have kind of slipped through the cracks. Weapons that, in my opinion, can more than comfortably carry their weight within their respective classes' lineups, despite the community at large kind of ignoring or viewing them as bad. In this video, I want to talk about some of them. These are 3 slept-on weapons in TF2. Weapons that, while not broken or completely class-defining, I feel deserve significantly more dues than they get. I want to stress that I can't possibly cover every base in this video, so if I don't talk about your favorite slept-on weapon, sing its praises in the comments. Also, we're going to be talking about casual pub TF2 in this video, and nothing else. I figured that was important to mention. All that said, let's roll.
Keep out of Team Rocket's way. How about I fucking blow you up, huh? What about that?
So, funny story. This was originally going to be a filler video where I talked about one weapon for each class for about a paragraph each. It was going to be like 11 minutes long and I'd comfortably call it a day. But then something happened. I earnestly used the Scottish Resistance for the first time ever in my 10 years of playing TF2. I equipped it, got the hang of it, and set out to record footage of it. And after a bit, I immediately knew that I wanted to talk about it at length. This weapon deserved more than a paragraph. It deserved a full weapon subcategories deep dive. To say that this weapon left an immediately strong impact on me would be a tremendous understatement. Let's talk about the Scottish Resistance. The Scottish Resistance is an unlockable secondary weapon for Demo Man. A slightly repainted and modified sticky bomb launcher, this gun boasts a primary unique ability to allow Demo Man to selectively detonate sticky bombs. By looking in the general directions of the bombs of his choice, the Demo Man can choose which bombs to detonate individually rather than triggering them all at once. To aid in this, Demo Man can uniquely see this weapon's sticky bombs through walls, and can place up to an additional 6 compared to the stock sticky launcher for a total of 14. This allows the Demo Man to place multiple traps and selectively activate them wherever he sees fit. Additionally, this weapon also boasts a 25% faster firing speed than stock and 50% more reserve ammo. Its damage, range, and projectile speed are also otherwise uncompromised. As a sole singular negative, this weapon's sticky bombs take 0.8 seconds longer to prime than stock, meaning that they can't be airbursted or spammed in enemies' faces nearly as effectively. So, you see all these positive stats in this item's tooltip? You see all these funny blue lines of text contrasted against that one red one? They mean something. This weapon fucking rocks. The Scottish Resistance is so goddamn fun, and I am embarrassed, humiliated, and deeply regretful that it took me over a decade of playing TF2 to give it an earnest whirl. I can't really give a good reason as to why. I always just kind of heard this weapon was underused and wasn't really interested. I was gaslit into thinking this weapon was bad. But rest assured, this is not a weapon ruined by one stat. This is not a weapon hampered by one stat. This is a certified, front-loaded, great TF2 weapon, and one that I truthfully recommend giving an earnest whirl after you finish this video. I feel like a lot of people get really caught up on that longer sticky bomb arm time. This weapon's one negative, the fact that you can't comfortably use this weapon for sticky spamming or juggling aggressive enemies. And that's true. If you're the kind of brainless, bitchless, pocket medic needing demo player whose one joy in life is pub stomping with your Australian sticky launcher that you've inevitably renamed a slur, then this stat'll probably take some adjustment. It is genuinely worse as an aggressive sticky spamming weapon, and I will not deny that. However, if you enjoy using your sticky bomb launcher for literally any other purpose, then I am speaking the word of the righteous when I tell you that this weapon is unironically incredible. Aside from the increased bomb arm time, it is genuinely just the stock sticky bomb launcher with more choice, more bombs out at a time, a faster firing speed, and otherwise uncompromised damage and killing power, and it is good. Right out of the gate, you can just straight up carpet bomb the enemy team with this weapon, just standing from an advantageous position and raining sticky bombs on them at a rate and speed that even the most astute player can't react to. If you have a good angle and a solid handle on how to position your bombs, then you can quite literally rain hell on your enemies. While this might not seem super effective due to the longer bomb arm time, in practice it's incredibly easy to just lay a bunch of bombs around the enemy's feet and selectively detonate them as enemies walk over them. The ability to manually select which stickies you blow up and the sheer number of them you can have at a time allows you to set set up situations where the enemy is simply never safe. Anywhere they step could be a potential sticky bomb's resting place. With a good grasp on your enemy's movement and a bit of map knowledge, it's very easy to cover quite literally every base you need with this weapon. Being able to see sticky bombs through walls makes smart and predictive detonation based on your enemy's movement a sensationally rewarding skill to get good at, and even if you're just blind firing stickies into their general direction, sweeping through a crowd of enemies by holding M2 and detonating all of your bombs in one glorious wave is very fun. Despite this weapon's reputation as a trap or defense-oriented weapon, it's remarkably easy to make very potent use of it as an offense tool with a bit of resourceful play and map knowledge. Your strongest tool with the Scottish Resistance is knowledge, using your map and game state savvy to predict where enemies will be and giving them a glorious send-off.
Help! I require assistance!
That's not to say it isn't useful as a trapping tool though, as that genuinely is one of this weapon's stronger suits. Aside from funny spawn camping and teleporter camping, this weapon is an uncontested king at setting traps and punishing enemies for attempting to walk forward. You have 14 bombs to make use of at any given time, and can detonate whichever ones you need at any moment, so there's very little stopping you from just walling off every potential access point to the enemy team, and making use of whichever trap you need at whichever given opportunity. This weapon's uncompromised range and damage compared to stock means that no concessions ever have to be made with each individual trap, and you can just have multiple down at a time. You can put the fear of God into your enemies with this weapon, making them unable to push forward out of fear of there being a sticky trap around every corner. And even with all of that said, you can definitely still sticky spam to some extent with this weapon. While it is true that you won't be airbursting stickies and juggling enemies with it, the bomb arm time is still only a little over a second, and a good chunk of that is accounted for by the travel time. This means that you can just spam mouse 1 and lay stickies somewhere in the ballpark of fucking everywhere, and basically turn the map into a minefield. It is so remarkably easy to just have stickies laid in every corner of the map with this thing, and whether intentionally or not, have a sticky ready for every occasion. Combine this with the weapon's other positive stats, and you've got a surprisingly effective tool for both offensive and defensive play. The Scottish Resistance really is just the perfect storm of little quality of life features and neat little stats. All of its individual traits come together to ultimately create one of the most fun, satisfying, and rewarding alternative playstyles in the game, and one that makes you feel like a true big brain gamer for taking full advantage of it. All that is to say, why are we not running this? Like, this is a truly great and fun weapon, and one that aside from one very specific aggressive playstyle, is barely hampered at all compared to stock. With the later weapons on this list, I can kind of understand why some players might not want to use them. But with this one, it's a damn effective and very, very strong alternative to the stock sticky bomb launcher, and one that I would genuinely encourage giving an earnest try. Any notions about this weapon being awkward, stiff, or uncomfortable to use will go right out of the window once you get used to using it. All in all, if I may blow my load a little bit early here, the Scottish Resistance is the Slept On TF2 weapon. It's underrated because it's underrated, because the community has gotten used to the narrative that it is, and not for any reason to do with its quality or strength. I am speaking in earnest sincerity when I say that this may just be my new preferred secondary for Demo Man. It's not as immediately rewarding as a stock sticky bomb launcher, and both definitely have their merits, but if you want a weapon that's strong, flourishes in multiple situations, and makes you feel very cool and smart when you use it properly, then this weapon will offer very little resistance.
Yeah, America's great, isn't it? Except for the South.
Next up is probably the definitive example of an underrated TF2 weapon, Engineer Southern Hospitality. This thing has a reputation for being totally fine and effective in its core use, but also being dreadfully boring and failing to offer any substantial bonuses over Engineer's other wrenches. This thing gets included in pretty much every underrated weapons video on YouTube, and virtually every one of them mentions in some capacity that its only real problem is that it's very boring. And you'll be happy to know that I'm gonna do the exact same thing here. Let's talk about it. The Southern Hospitality is an unlockable melee weapon for Engineer, a jagged, spiked pipe wrench with a pointy knuckle guard. This weapon's primary trait is its ability to induce 5 seconds of bleed on a successful melee hit. This, combined with its 65 base damage, can theoretically allow for up to 105 damage in a single swing, should the bleed go uninterrupted. As a few primary trade-offs, this weapon makes Engineer take 20% more damage from fire while it's equipped, and it cannot get random critical hits. Boy, that was a short stat lineup. Surely I can pad this paragraph out a little bit. Hey, watch the Golden Girls. It's a good show. Alright, I think this section's long enough now. So, this is an incredibly simple stat lineup for an Engineer weapon. Fun fact, this is the only one of Engineer's unlockable wrenches that doesn't interact with his buildings in any unique way, offering no differences from stock when it comes to construction, upgrade, or repair rates. This weapon could hypothetically be given to any other class with these exact same stats, and lose none of its mechanical function. This is, not unlike the backscatter from the stealth weapons video, a very boring and borderline fan weapon-esque lineup type of stats that feels more at home in a Weapon Concepts Reddit thread than the actual game. This weapon almost feels like it sort of slipped through the cracks, maintaining a very 2010s design philosophy as TF2 progressed into the late 2010s and 2020s. Fun fact, this weapon's only ever functional change was replacing its no random critical hit stat with a 25% damage penalty instead in 2011, which lasted less than a day before being reverted. You may have also noticed that I actually mentioned this weapon's lack of random critical hits, which is something I don't tend to do in these videos. I usually ignore this stat because it's a totally tertiary attribute on most weapons that doesn't significantly figure into their gameplay or balance, but in the case of the Southern Hospitality, it actually is pretty notable. Engineer has more to gain from random melee crits than any other class. Being able to instantly murk spies with 195 damage swings in order to remove their sappers or repair buildings before it's too late can be vitally important to your game plan. Not being able to do that is genuinely a pretty big deal in casual and can absolutely lead to deaths or destroyed buildings that could have otherwise been avoided. On literally any other weapon in the game, the no random critical hit stat is entirely negligible, but it is truly an important part of the Southern Hospitality's balance. Luckily, this weapon's core upside does go some ways towards offsetting this. This is one of only 2 non-scout bleed-inducing weapons in the game, and you'll be happy to know that it is the better of the 2. This weapon induces 5 seconds of guaranteed bleed at 8 damage per tick on swing, on top of otherwise uncompromised melee damage, allowing it to deal a single swing maximum of 105. This is heavily reliant on the enemy you hit actually allowing the bleed to go through for its maximum duration, as all it takes is 1 health kit, medic, or dispenser to remove it on most classes. I'd say this is best used as a pressure tool on most enemies, where it can be handy for putting them on borrow time or forcing them to retreat as their health ticks down. It takes exactly 1 swing to put light classes at significant threat of bleeding out, and it does the same amount of damage as the stock wrench, so a second swing is a guaranteed kill either way. Against classes with more than 125 HP, the bleed can be a great way to apply a condition to the fight that makes them either have to engage or flee. While the bleed is pretty much an inconvenience at best on most classes, its real intended application should be entirely clear. It is a spy counter. Bleed, not unlike Afterburn, induces a visible particle effect and animation on anyone who's afflicted by it, meaning that you can use the Southern Hospitality to weed out and track, disguise, and cloak spies. Plus, if a spy happens to be using an unbuffed kunai, then all it takes is 1 swing and 2 ticks of bleed to send him packing. It isn't foolproof, as the bleed duration is cut in half on a cloak spy, and he takes less damage while cloaked, but in general, giving Engineer his own equivalent to Pyro's Afterburn can make him more independent at tracking and dealing with pesky Frenchmen. I can't understand the desire to give a weapon like this to Engineer specifically, as he has a lot to gain from being able to apply a visual debuff to enemies. If the bleed isn't what secures the kill, then a second melee swing or follow-up from an astute teammate certainly will be. And speaking of visual debuffs, this weapon's other negative is pretty damn minor, all things considered. This weapon has a super arbitrary 20% extra fire damage vulnerability while equipped, which sort of feels like Valve threw darts at a dartboard to pick this weapon's main downside. I'll be frank, Engineer does not care much about taking extra fire damage. While it can be pretty rough if you get caught out while playing aggressively or attempting to move your buildings, in general, Engineer tends to play pretty close to his nest when running this weapon, and anything that can set him on fire won't make it very far in the face of a leveled sentry. Even if you do happen to get pecked by a long-range scorch shot round or something, just retreat to your dispenser. The only time it really matters is on the rare occasion that an Ubered Pyro pushes in, and in that case, you'd probably be dead regardless of which wrench you're using. This is one of the most pointless and dismissible downsides in the game, and does really contribute to this weapon's slapdash feeling design. But aside from that, you're pretty much just using the stock wrench. Your building, maintaining, and upgrading are completely unaltered, meaning that if you're accustomed to playing stock wrench Engineer, you can continue doing it completely uninhibited with the Southern Hospitality. In essence, it really is just a stock wrench with a situational upside, and even more situational downside, and no random critical hits. If you've noticed that a lot of the footage I've used in this section is just me playing defensive level 3 Engineer, it's because that really is what you're doing with this weapon. None of its stats are definitive or weapon defining enough to facilitate an alternative playstyle. It really is just stock with some extra bells and whistles. So as for why I think this weapon is slept on, it's primarily just because it's kind of boring. It's not bad by any stretch, and there is a legitimate argument to be made that it is a straight upgrade over the stock wrench in most defensive situations, but it's also a profoundly simple and uninteresting weapon. Compared to the speed of the Jag, the utility of the Eureka effect, and the playstyle facilitating design of the Gunslinger, the Southern Hospitality just doesn't have an interesting enough hook or strategy to make it an immediate first option for most players. I definitely did enjoy using it for this video, like look at some of these kill streaks I went on, but I can also kind of understand why some players tend to forget about it. Still though, the Southern Hospitality is not a bad weapon at its core. It may be boring and a bit white bread flavored, but it's still plenty usable and useful as a weapon. If you're someone who tends to run the stock wrench, you've really got nothing to lose by trying the Southern Hospitality. It won't redefine engineer for you, but it's consistent, functional, and plenty usable, and that's more than some other TF2 weapons can say. I may be from New York, but even I can appreciate some good Southern hospitality.
I want you to meet the Enforcer. I want my name to be Spaghetti. Alright, Spaghetti. Whatever, I don't care.
And our final slept-on weapon for this video is Spy Snub-Nosed Little Scrunkly the Enforcer. This technically is a weapon I've talked about on YouTube before this, and quite negatively too. However, that was in the Weapons Valve Actively Hates video, which was literally the first TF2 video I made after a 2-year break from the game. I barely knew what I was talking about at that point, and didn't even know how to disable a resample, so my opinions on the Enforcer in that video are best left ignored. My modern opinions on the weapon are much more positive, and while I do agree with the general community notion that it is the weakest revolver in Spy's lineup, that does not at all make it a bad or useless weapon. Let's dive in. The Enforcer is an unlockable revolver for Spy, a small snub-nosed revolver with a pearl grip. This gun boasts one unique stat amongst Spy's revolvers and one unique stat amongst the entire game. Its first upside is a flat 20% damage bonus while disguised, meaning that the weapon allows you to jump scare enemies out of a disguise with a noticeably stronger reveal shot. Additionally, this weapon features an entirely unique resistance piercing ability, allowing its shots to ignore enemy resistances and always deal its ordinary amount of DPS. As a primary trade-off, this weapon features a 20% slower firing speed than the stock revolver, making its overall DPS lower, and it can't get random critical hits. Whoa, who put that there? The Enforcer is an interesting weapon within TF2, as both of its positive stats are completely unique to it. No other Spy revolver features an interaction with its disguises that's even remotely similar to this weapon, and its resistance piercing ability is entirely unique to the whole game. Damage resistances tend to be unsung heroes within TF2 matches, considering how important consistent damage thresholds are to the game flow, so having a weapon that goes through them is remarkably novel and useful in the right circumstances. That said, the Enforcer is also a notably unremarkable weapon, providing a very consistent and useful set of positives, yet failing to reach either the highs or lows of some of Spy's other revolvers. Starting from the top, the 20% extra damage while disguised is a surprisingly fun and effective stat. All things considered, you should have a disguise up at all times while using the Enforcer. Even if you don't intend to use it for infiltration, the one shot of boosted damage you get before dropping your disguise can be exactly what you need to blindside an enemy with either a crippling fight opener or an unexpected fight ender. It's incredibly fun and BM to drop a fleeing low health enemy with a boosted Enforcer shot out of a disguise before they can even react, and in the event that you sneak up behind a light class or wounded important pick, the boosted damage can be all you need for a clean 1 or 2 shot. This actually works in tandem with this weapon's resistance piercing as well, as there are some very impactful damage barriers you can breach using this combination of stats. Specifically, this weapon's boosted damage and resistance piercing allow you to cleanly one-shot unbuffed kunai spies through their dead ringers, which is basically the Spy main equivalent to being told that everything you've ever known and believed is wrong. This weapon is an unironically great check to fellow enemy spies and light classes in general, and I can't take that away from it. However, the utility of being able to surprise unaware enemies and cleanly 1 or 2 shot specific targets kind of conflicts pretty heavily with some of Spy's other noteworthy weapons. Specifically, yeah, Spy has weapons like the Diamondback and Ambassador that are arguably just as capable, if not even better, at blindsiding enemies out of disguises. A roughly 75 damage one-time attack can't really compete with a guaranteed 102 damage one from any range. That said, the Enforcer does have 2 concrete upsides over these weapons that I feel give it more of a niche than people give it credit for. One is that it's unconditional. So long as you're disguised, you won't need to hit the enemy's heads or have secured a backstabber sap beforehand to guarantee the extra damage. And unlike those 2 weapons, its per shot damage is otherwise identical to the stock revolver. The other upside is this weapon's damage piercing. Now, I'll be honest, the damage piercing effect doesn't come into play too terribly often. While it does pretty effectively counter everything you'd want and expect it to, save for the damage resistance on sapped sentries for some reason, shooting an enemy under the effects of a Vaccinator, Uber, or Brass Beast Res with your revolver shouldn't exactly be your first choice. If you're just attempting to outdamage enemies raw with resistances using the Enforcer, then you can expect to be thoroughly and decisively humbled. That said, as I mentioned earlier, this stat works exceptionally well in tandem with the Enforcer's damage bonus while disguised. The 2 of them together basically allow you to become, for lack of a better term, your team's Enforcer, securing clean, efficient kills on low health enemies who think they're safe behind their resistances. From the outset, this is clearly not a gun you're meant to use for full-on front-facing gunfights. You're meant to use it as a surprising cleanup tool for weakened, overconfident, or fleeing enemies. To this end, I honestly think it's one of the more thoughtfully and elaborately designed weapons in the game. Its overall DPS is lower than the stock revolver due to its slower firing speed, but to its credit, it's not trying to match the same niche as the stock revolver. For what it is and what it's clearly intended to do, I find the Enforcer to be a fun and effective weapon. It only falls off when you try and use it in situations it's not suited for. When you use it as an assassin cleanup type of weapon or to catch enemies who assume they're in the clear off guard, it's startlingly solid. So all in all, I don't find the Enforcer to be a bad weapon at all. It is most certainly Spy's worst revolver, but Spy's worst revolver is still better than the best of some other TF2 weapon categories. While I understand this is definitely a niche and to an extent outclassed by other options weapon, it's still a surprisingly fun sleeper tool that I unironically enjoy busting out every now and then. Nothing matches one-shotting a low health medic or demo as they flee. All in all, not bad. Also, it's so damn cute. And there's a few slept-on weapons in TF2. This does not at all cover the base of every slept-on or underrated weapon in the game, so if y'all are interested, I'd be more than happy to someday make this the first weapon subcategories episode to get a direct sequel. Either way, I find all of these weapons to be fun, worthwhile additions to the game that people generally tend to sleep on. If this video has taught you anything, try and make it that you don't always have to rigidly adhere to a meta. Sometimes trying alternative options can be fun, unless it's the Righteous Bison.
It's the most fun you can possibly have.
Thanks, hope y'all have a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch y'all later. Cheers!